of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict, please state so at this time. Seeing none, Madam Council, I don't think we have quorum,
You do not.
but we have only an information item to go through today, so I'm assuming we're okay to proceed.
You'll just have to skip approval of the meeting minutes from May. We'll do it.
Okay, all right, we'll bump the approval of meeting minutes till the next meeting, which is September, right? All right. I've got the wrong agenda pulled up. You got, yes, thank you. So we have one information item this morning, and Jason Watkins and Sandy, I'm gonna butcher your last name. I've only known Sandy. Overview of the 2024-2034 NC Solid Waste and Materials Management Plan Update. Jason or Sandy, if you want to go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
Good to go. Good morning, Chair Baumgartner, committee. I'm Jason Watkins, Solid Waste Section Chief, Division of Waste Management. I am here this morning with my colleague Sandy Skolachenko, Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, to give you guys an overview of one of our major accomplishments over the last 2 years here at in DEQ, and that is the 2034 Solid Waste and Materials Management Plan. So just give you a little bit of background on the plan itself. So the Solid Waste Management Act in 1989 was groundbreaking legislation here in the state that set forth a lot of policies and procedures in terms of how we manage solid waste and materials management. Here in the state, it established statewide recycling goals and lots of other things, but one of the things that it set forth was a process by which the state and local governments are required to plan for the proper management of solid waste here in the state. And so past iterations of that plan did occur in 1990 was the original. We got off a little bit in time and ended up in 2003 and then again in 2014. So this is our newest version of the plan. And essentially this plan establishes what we view as lessons learned from past plans, but also a path forward on where we feel like the department's interest should be as it relates to waste management. So just give you a little bit of overview of the process to get to this point. So we started back in spring of 2023, internal drafting goals for this current 10-year plan, and we established our internal working group at that time. We did send out a very comprehensive statewide stakeholder survey in the fall of 23 and received well over 400 respondents to that. I gave you a little graph there just to give you an idea of where the stakeholders that responded to that were engaged across the spectrum of what we work in. And then we started, based on those survey results and our internal work, drafted the plan in spring of 24, did some additional internal and external targeted stakeholder communications, and ultimately released the final plan in September 24, just in time for former Secretary Beiser to sign off on the plan, as well as get it through Governor Cooper's office. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. So just to give you an overview of the plan areas of focus and some of the things that Sandy and I'll talk to you about today. So the plan really looks at 5 primary areas of focus, and that is advancing waste reduction here in the state, growing the circular economy, developing infrastructure around the recycling markets and optimizing material recovery, ensuring that the work we do is protective of public health and safety, and also how do we better educate and engage with the public in terms of who are our stakeholders and who are involved in the work we do. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Sandy to start her part of the presentation.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everyone. So we wanted to pull out a few key actions from the plan that we thought were some of the most important points that we want to work towards over the next 10 years. And one of those is supporting the growth of the private sector recycling industry, expanding the full chain of the recycling system from haulers to processors, composters, and manufacturers that are then making new products with recycled content. And by strengthening this infrastructure, we open up more opportunity for recycling from everyone, the residential, the commercial, and the industrial sectors. One tool to help do this is conducting strategically targeted grant programs to bolster the recycling economy and create new jobs. We've had success awarding recycling business development grants for more than 30 years through our office, and we use that program as a unique economic development tool. The funding requests that we receive each year regularly exceed our available grant allocation. So we know if we had additional funds, we'd immediately have good projects to put them towards. One idea to expand that funding is to restore a circular economy trust fund, which would receive a portion of the solid waste disposal tax. This is how our grant programs used to be funded up until 2013. So this is a concept to restore that previous funding mechanism. We also want to build recovery networks for materials with emerging markets, such as agricultural plastics, textiles, expanded polystyrene, or styrofoam. These are materials that, by way of advanced technology or opening up new markets, have more opportunities to recycle now. And then also focusing on emerging waste streams, such as renewable energy technologies, including solar panels, electric vehicle batteries, and utility storage batteries. And finally, to support this work and direct our efforts, it's important to conduct periodic studies to identify waste diversion opportunities and collaborate with brand owners and trade associations to advance the state's recycling systems and goals. For instance, right now, we're doing a study funded by the EPA that includes a series of waste sorts to see what's going into the landfill and where there are opportunities for diversion. Spoiler alert, we know food waste is a big one. We're also looking at how recycling flows through the state as part of that study. And the goal is to see where there are gaps and where investment is needed. So we have kind of like a prioritized list of projects to strategically and proactively focus on in the coming years. Our next focus area or topic area is optimizing waste reduction and material recovery. So to help do that, this plan calls for a stakeholder process to develop a statewide waste reduction or recycling goal. So as a little refresher, we did have a statewide recycling or waste reduction goal. It was established in that legislature of 1989, and the goal was to achieve a per capita waste reduction of 40% by 2001. We didn't meet that goal, but it did catalyze a lot of new programs, for instance, launching a lot of curbside recycling programs in local communities, because each county was supposed to meet that goal independently so that we could get there as a state. Another benefit of a waste reduction goal is a reminder that source reduction is really the first strategy, not creating as much waste in the first place. And looking at things like single-use packaging and disposable food serviceware, also an invitation for everyone, including state agencies, to look at our own practices and make adjustments to reduce waste. We also want to identify gaps in our residential recycling performance and provide technical and financial assistance to help close those gaps. So things we know we can work on include increasing cart-based curbside recycling programs. We know these programs collect the most recycling, and what we want to work towards is if you have a cart that picks up trash in front of your house, we want you to have a cart that picks up recycling in front of your house. We want it to be just as easy to recycle as it is to throw something away. Expanding recycling access at multifamily housing. We have about 20% of our North Carolina residents and growing who live in multifamily or apartment style housing. And we know that often those properties lack an on-site recycling option. We want to increase opportunities for away from home recycling at work, at a park, at a gas station, a lot of these places where recyclable beverage containers are being generated. And when there's no option to recycle, they're going in the trash. improve efficiency of rural recycling programs to make them convenient and accessible, but also optimize the transportation so that recyclable materials can get to market without being too costly. And using education to help capture more quality recycling from existing programs. This means making sure that people know what goes in the bin and then giving them feedback in a constructive way if they're putting the wrong things in the bin, like plastic bags, clothing, lithium-ion batteries. None of those belong in curbside recycling. And lastly, we want to facilitate increased diversion of commodities that make up a significant portion of the waste stream, including organics, food waste, and construction and demolition debris. Focusing on these materials can have a really big impact in helping to preserve our existing landfill capacity. And we know in particular, food waste is one where there's a lot of opportunity to focus on the source reduction side. So eliminate wasted food from being generated in the first place, helping to build connections so edible food can be redirected to those in need, and then promoting other diversion strategies like feeding animals, composting, and anaerobic digestion. We know that food waste makes up nearly a quarter of what we're sending to the landfill. So this is a huge opportunity area and a big focus of our team now and in the coming years. I'll turn it back over to Jason to cover this one.
Thank you, Sandy. So what you'll see kind of in what Sandy talked about, but also in what I'm going to cover here is a lot of this plan covers both the regulatory and the non-regulatory side of what we do in managing solid waste and materials management here in the state. What it also does is it crosses over oftentimes in internal policies and procedures of the department, but in some cases path forward and in the past it's been in front of this commission in terms of rule development. There's also legislative components with this. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things. So really talking about the proper management of solid waste and making sure that our landfills themselves are not impacting the environment beyond the scope of a reasonable, I guess, assumption. So part of that is evaluating in this plan is a path forward on evaluating potential changes to the regulatory framework around ceasing disposal of waste in unlined landfills. So we still, here in North Carolina, dispose of construction and demolition waste in unlined landfills. And so that's certainly a particular area of interest, and that's an area that will ultimately require both probably statutory change, but also rule change in front of this commission. We are working to continue to investigate, as we've talked about in the past months with you guys, and you've heard multiple presentations across the department, with a focus on evaluating PFAS surrounding our land in association with our landfills and other emerging contaminants through ongoing detection, monitoring, assessment, where there are impacts, and ultimately taking corrective action to correct those. We will be working with, as part of this plan, our Division of Air Quality and EPA on increased opportunities to address methane monitoring at our landfills, looking at facility design and operation and monitoring to ensure that our landfills are not contributing in excess to emissions. But also a lot of our landfills here in the state are getting some age on them, and we're getting to a point where they're starting to generate a lot more odors. And so that is a point of interest for our staff as it relates to complaint response and things of that nature. And so certainly we'll be working in that area of focus. One of our primary interests in this plan, and really a lot of the work going on behind the scenes and conversations right now, is around the idea of landfill capacity. Certainly when we look at impacts from Hurricane Helene in the western part of the state, which was already a portion of the state that has somewhat limited landfill capacity anyway, we are looking at a broader landfill capacity discussion here in North Carolina. When you look at the statewide total, we're in fairly good shape. We're probably somewhere in the 27 to 30 year overall years of landfill capacity left. However, when you get into isolated areas of the state, we certainly have huge voids that need to be filled where there's no infrastructure or need. Oftentimes when we talk about landfill capacity and we talk about path forward, to me, it's similar to a lot of discussions around energy transition. Landfills have been and continue to be a necessary part of the world we work in. Are they going to be the best management practice in the future? We don't know that, but at least for right now, we've got to preserve the capacity we have for the benefit of the state citizens and its businesses. We are working on continued efforts, and this is one that we've already been working on since the plan's been in place, and really started this before the plan came about. And that is working with our state legislature on legislation to establish a beneficial reuse program here in North Carolina that will basically put in a uniform process to allow the department to evaluate specific materials and whether or not they truly need to be disposed of. Can they be safely reused or otherwise diverted for other purposes? Most other states in the country have similar programs, which puts North Carolina at a disadvantage at times, especially when you start talking about attracting businesses that may be looking at zero waste type discussions and the opportunity to divert waste from disposal. If we don't have the ability or procedures to be able to approve those type things, it kind of puts us at a disadvantage. So one of the other things, back to my cursor here. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in this plan, and Sandy hinted at it already, is really looking at exploring both funding, but also policy solutions to solid waste and materials management. Sandy already mentioned the restoring the funding that used to be in the general statutes that came out of the disposal tax. That was monies that were diverted to the general fund by the legislature in 2013. We worked diligently to pull back some of that and still continue to work on that. And you'll see a lot of discussion around that solid waste disposal tax in this plan and how we can take advantage of that and potentially modify it. So again, looking at, again, changes to that disposal tax to better support funding at both state and local government programs. When we talk about resiliency in the department, and we talk about, managing waste, we need to make sure from a state perspective, we're doing everything we can to not only bolster our efforts, but to make sure that local government recycling and waste programs are also adequately funded. We are certainly focused on finding funding mechanisms to address PFAS and landfill leachate. That's a key interest in our industry, specifically around what are the impacts going to be when we start regulating it more intensely at the wastewater plants and how that's going to fall downhill to our landfills, which are major users of some of those plants. We are looking at amending legislation and internal policies to address deficiencies around things like collection of scrap tires and electronics. That's a huge success we just achieved in the last 3 weeks here in North Carolina. Governor Stein signed the county, what was Senate Bill 706, County Waste Management Assistance Bill, which, similar to the conversations around the disposal tax, is going to redirect funding back away from the general fund back into the scrap tire disposal account to the tune of about $8.85 million a year based on FY 23-24 funding. So that will be that much more money going into that program to help assist with tire management programs. We're also looking at policies to support, again, landfill capacity, looking at some of the things Sandy talked about on advancing sustainable materials management, and really how do those things play into not only the environmental and public health aspects of our role, but also where that meshes with the department's mission to ensure that we're balancing environmental regulation with economic growth here in the state. I think that's all we have for you guys today on the plan. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jason, Sandy. One quick question I had, the reuse that you were talking about, what kind of materials would that be? What kind of situation would it be? C&D coming in and reuse somewhere else, or what?
So yeah, we look at it across a variety of fronts. And so kind of without boring you guys to death or getting into too much regulatory history, back in the 80s, 90s, and even in the early 2000s, we operated under a kind of a beneficial reuse policy here in the state. And when the legislature saw fit to basically direct some of the agency's efforts away from trying to deal with policy and put more things into rules, this is an opportunity to kind of codify some of that. But really where we look at material reuses, we could be looking at things like reuse of asphalt shingles. That's one thing that we've approved in the past. It happens at a lot of our asphalt plants right now where that material goes back into a particular reuse. We've had lots of conversations with local governments here in the state that have a keen interest on potentially being able to screen plastics and other material out of their street sweepings and be able to reuse that grit material for potentially mixing it in for traction control, for snow removal, those type things. We've approved things in the past like land application of tobacco dust, cotton gin dust, those things. So there's a variety of materials out there that right now, in the absence of that beneficial reuse program, the agency we kind of don't have an approval mechanism, at least a legally binding one. And so the driver there is to reestablish that program. Again, that is an item that's currently sitting in the House budget bill that's stalled in the legislature. And so that may be something that if it may stay in, if we ultimately get a budget, but it could also be pulled out, and then we'd be looking at potentially, going back with that again next session. But there are a variety of industries here in the state that have materials that are very similar to other materials. Could be, gypsum, it could be cement wallboard. There's a variety of things out there that have a potential reuse, but without an ability, a kind of an approval or an evaluation mechanism. We just don't have a clear path to be able to approve those things right now. So again, we're kind of hampering business opportunities. And at the same time, we're also negatively impacting landfill capacity by putting everything in the landfill. So
It sounds beneficial to do, and the materials you're talking about don't have the complexities of the plastics for recycling. It sounds like, as far as asphalt shingles, don't have the complexity that some plastics do if they're used in a certain way and have difficulty recycling too.
correct. And so there again, that's the reason why there is a need for an evaluation process versus just a straight out. Oftentimes we get approached here in the state, and we've seen this in other particular industries where we look at legislative initiatives to try and exempt certain things just strictly from regulation. And while I'm certainly not one to overregulate anybody, there still is a smart path forward on lots of these things to make sure that there are the proper protections in place if those protections are needed. In some cases, there are materials that certainly, have the ability to be reused without being regulated. So.
Sure. Sounds good. Commissioner Albert.
Yeah, the last meeting, I talked about a machine called Tiger Cat that really makes biochar. We're working with that. It's a lean recovery, obviously with the debris that's there, but also with the down timber. The issue that we have is that with contracts, it's either been incinerated or it's been put into mulch. And so we're having tremendous amounts of mulch that's not being used. We have some counties that are interested in this because it's going to end up in a landfill. If that was the case, then you could, if you had something, a way to actually make biochar, you could reduce that volume by 80%. It's what we've been estimating. That's huge. The other piece of it, you could put the biochar back on that landfill, and that would reduce the contaminants like PFAS or others that would actually absorb to it. So I don't understand. It's driving me crazy working on this project that I can't get a single dollar from nobody. And it's just all in contracts. And so I think if you would add that too, that may be something that's a possibility. I think eventually you could actually have that in landfills across the state where they could use, that's construction waste, anything that was a cellular base, you could actually make into a product that is a premium product too. So that's just something to consider.
Absolutely. That is certainly an opportunity there. And I feel your pain as someone who's been working the hurricane response for the last 10 months as well, and trying to navigate both the funding mechanisms, but also the regulatory things around that. I will point out, it's not part of this presentation, but just related to that, just make sure you guys are aware. Another piece of legislation that was signed into law on the 26th of June, I believe, there was a provision that exempted some of the mulch material to be allowed to be composted without a permit from DEQ under a given set of criteria. And so we have, as we found ways to do so, opened up opportunities immediately to address some of that. I know certainly biochar is one of those areas. Incineration is certainly one that I know my colleagues in air and we've been working diligently on. This is certainly not a time to point fingers or to say, you know, there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk about Helene for years to come and how we fix things. But I think there's certainly conversations to be had, to your point, on how we quickly got to a material that seems to have a less than desirable way to manage it, meaning we potentially rush to rough grind everything up into mulch material that's had less of a reuse. And I think if more of that conversation could have been had on the front end with the state and federal contractors, we may be in a little bit different position than we are right now, but that's certainly, you know, lessons learned and something we navigate going forward.
Sure, thank you.
Committee members, any other questions?
I'm at the right committee, right?
Yes,
Came
sir,
in
you
late,
are.
I'm
Thank you
sorry.
for showing up, but we had not have quorum, Commissioner King.
I want to make sure I'm a committee member so I can
Yes,
make
sir,
a
you
comment.
We need to take a vote on that.
You might know. Sandy, interesting comments that you've made, coming in and starting to listen. Missed a lot of it, so I may be asking some rhetorical or some questions that have already been questioned. Making decisions, you mentioned House bills or Senate bills or General Assembly bills, whatever. Making those decisions, my question would be, has the process brought out tonnage and weight? Tonnage, which material? So you mentioned tires and asphalt shingles, and we've mentioned debris from a hurricane. So when you identify the tonnage, have you established a baseline for tonnage for that particular material or that product? And doing your evaluations, do you grade into that tonnage to equal cubic feet? And from that, the space to deal with that tonnage, that material, that specific item that you're processing, instead of burning it, incinerating it, or burying it, then as we dispose of it, has the department identified a baseline for tonnage, cubic feet during their evaluation process of what is not needed just today, but what might be needed in the next 3 to 5 years?
So from a landfill capacity perspective, as a reminder to.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. No, yeah, so from a landfill capacity perspective, and just generally speaking, as you guys are well aware, because you see the report and it goes to the legislature every year, the agency for months, starting this month and moving forward for the next 6 months, will be gathering basically baseline data from across the state on recycling programs, on waste programs, looking at very specific materials. All of that information is brought together in the annual solid waste and materials management report that ultimately ends up at the legislature. So we have 35 plus years of data right now that speaks to specific materials that are generated in the state, how they're being diverted over time. We have that type of information in that scale. We also have some very targeted analysis. So one of the things that we specifically looked at related to Helene and one of the initiatives that hasn't really moved forward right now is we really did get down to the cubic foot of landfill impacts from storm waste and really started trying to focus out and forecast out what the impacts of that landfill capacity was going to be and how to go about taking care of that. So yes, we have data that speaks to what is being diverted, what's being disposed. And I think then to your question, how we take that data and use it in our evaluation, certainly we will be establishing those. And that's kind of, I'll let Sandy speak a little bit to the statewide goal that she mentioned. That is, part of this conversation of when you look at ebb and flow over time, as North Carolina has grown as a state, we went in the late 80s, early 90s from disposing of about 1.3 tons per person annually. There was a point in time during the downturn of the economy and some other things in the early 2000s where that dropped down much closer to 0.9. And as North Carolina's continued to grow and we've moved back away from that, we're back up probably around 1.2, 1.3 again. And so again, we have an unbelievable amount of data that we base a lot of our things off of. And I'll turn that over to Sandy specifically to talk about how they use that information in deciding how they deal with specific recycling programs.
Yeah, and to add on a little bit about the data, we have extremely good data about how much is going into our landfills across the state as far as tonnage, and we can convert that to cubic yards as well. And I don't know if you heard me mention, but right now our office is doing a study that's funded by EPA to characterize that waste that's going to a landfill. So sorting through what's coming across the scales, and then making some educated guesses about statewide, like how much of our landfill is food waste is going in there, how much is asphalt shingles, how much is other things that have an opportunity to be diverted. So with a combination of the study that we're doing and then looking at like national averages, I think we can come up with some pretty good guesstimates about, I think what you're getting at is if you focus on a particular material, like what's the impact going to be? How many cubic yards is that going to save in our landfill space, and how many years does that equate to in landfill capacity? So I think we're about to really build upon, kind of the robust data set that we already have, to have a little bit more material specific information that we could use for kind of goal setting and strategic planning.
Just follow up, Mr. Chairman, if I might, with Chair and committee. My thought process is having the permitting for municipalities and counties throughout the state, particularly in these areas that have been affected, such as Western North Carolina and those in the east. And it's taken years to do a lot of this, but getting rid of the waste into the landfills and permitting, then identifying what is the growing material. Is it due to a storm, or is it due to people just building homes? Is it due to the storm being a flood, or whether it be a hurricane, some natural disaster, or fire, something that you have to rebuild? But moving people into the state in different places, Mr. Chairman and committee members, is that as we permit these landfills out, that we give these municipalities and counties room to grow their vision and putting homes and putting people in place, but being able to take care of all of that waste, just not what they do per household or per bedroom or bathroom through the sewer. But we're talking about landfills, materials. So I'd like to know what that material is growing. Is it concrete? Is it asphalt? A lot of roads being built. DOT has to have statistics with the asphalt they're putting down on the ground. They're approving roads. All of this is good to have as we move forward in permitting anything having to do with this waste issue moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. It sounds like it may be area specific as well, landfill specific, what's going on in those areas. All right, we're bumping into Chair Solomon's time on the steering committee.
Approve the minutes.
Yes. Yeah, Commissioner Gibson, you're the last one. Did you have any comments or questions?
No comments or
All
questions.
right, just wanted to make sure. I would be remiss if I didn't ask Director Reagan if she had any comments.
I think it was phenomenal. I'm good.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. So now that we have a quorum, Commissioner King coming in, thank you, sir. We want to go ahead and approve the minutes from the last meeting. The minutes have been posted for review by committee members, and do I have a motion to approve?
I read a motion to approve.
Commissioner Yarborough has motion to approve. Any second?
A second.
Commissioner King. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes approved. All right, let's wind this up. Director Scott, upcoming items. Do you want to go through that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming out of this committee, there will be a item before the full commission tomorrow requesting approval for the final determination, the periodic review of existing rules. That's 15A, NCAC, O2L, O2N, O2O, and O2P. Jessica Monte, that the committee is familiar with, will present that item before the EMC.
All right. And future meetings looks like an upcoming agenda item for September, November, may be the 2L rules.
That's correct. It's a requesting approval to proceed to the full commission with the readoption. Once again, part of the periodic rule review process.
For the rules you talking about.
Yeah, for the O2L, O2N that we just discussed.
All right. Any further comments?
I know, I'd just like to thank Jason and Sandy, and all the other team members who helped with the 10-year state plan. You know, we're so busy with hurricane response and legislative items, and there's a lot going on in the state, but it's really great to have a 10-year plan and areas of focus as we grow as a state, and have increasing needs on disposal capacity to really focus on what we call M&M materials management. So appreciate the opportunity to present this to the committee, and thank you to all those that have helped with this plan.
Thanks to DWM and Deeks for putting it together. It was very informative. Director Rogers, what you got on your plate?
I have no comments at this time. We'll reserve that right for tomorrow and make comments to the full commission. Thank you.
Right, duly noted. That being said, I'm going to close this meeting out. This meeting stands adjourned.